Every month, as the first Saturday approached, devout Catholic families across the world prepared to fulfill the devotion requested at Fatima. They went to confession, prayed the rosary, attended Mass, and made acts of reparation to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Their intentions were sincere, or so it seemed. Candles were lit, statues were polished, hands folded in prayer. Everything appeared in order, and yet beneath the surface of ritual and routine, something felt off. In many homes, instead of peace, there was tension. Arguments broke out over small things. Children grew restless, and spouses exchanged cold glances. Even in solitude, there was a strange heaviness that hung in the air. Those who had prayed with diligence found themselves agitated or distracted. Despite doing everything correctly, their souls remained untouched, unmoved. It was as if grace was being poured out, but not received. Some reported difficulty sleeping the night before. Others said they felt nothing during their prayers, only dryness and restlessness. In confession, their hearts were closed, words mechanical. The Eucharist tasted like habit, not fire. One woman noticed how her family always seemed to argue right after finishing the rosary. A man found himself scrolling his phone in the moments that were meant to be sacred. They blamed tiredness, stress, or coincidence. But the pattern repeated. Parish groups and online forums, a quiet discomfort echoed through the faithful. Why does it feel like something is missing? No one dared say it aloud, but many felt it. Despite the outward practice of the 5 first Saturdays, their souls were not changing. They were honoring the letter, but losing the spirit. And the worst part, they didn't know why. They were doing everything right, weren't they? Sister Lucia had spoken many times about the 5 first Saturdays devotion, but there was one aspect she emphasized that often went unnoticed or was quietly ignored. It wasn't written on holy cards or recited during homilies. It wasn't printed in prayer guides or highlighted in parish announcements. It was a truth that made people uncomfortable, a spiritual secret too easily dismissed. Yet it was at the very heart of the devotion. She warned that heaven does not count external actions the way men do. God sees the intention before the gesture, the heart before the hands. To fulfill the first Saturdays as Our Lady requested was not just a matter of performing the 4 conditions. It required the soul to be engaged with love. Without that, the practice risked becoming a cold obligation. Lucia said that many Catholics performed the devotion mechanically, treating it like a checklist. They confessed, but without true sorrow. They prayed, but their thoughts wandered. They meditated on the mysteries, but their hearts remained far from Mary's suffering. The 4th condition, the intention to console the Immaculate Heart of Mary, was the one most neglected. Few even knew it existed, and fewer still lived it. In Lucia's letters and conversations with confessors, she repeated it clearly. See, reparation was not merely about prayer, but about offering love where love had been wounded. The Immaculate Heart was pierced by sin, indifference, and blasphemy. The first Saturdays were meant to be an answer to that pain. But without sincere love, the prayers were hollow. Without awareness of her suffering, the devotion became self-centered. An attempt to gain grace without giving comfort. Lucia saw that many souls were unknowingly offending the very heart they claimed to honor. They sought blessings, but not intimacy. They wanted protection, but not sacrifice. She spoke quietly but firmly. These first Saturdays done without love may fulfill the law, but they do not touch heaven. And for those who thought that completing the checklist guaranteed the promises of Fatima, she offered a sobering truth: God is not deceived by appearances. This was the secret few wanted to hear. It demanded something deeper than time or words. It demanded attention, reverence, and interior sincerity. Without these, the first Saturdays remained incomplete, no matter how faithfully they were observed. The Blessed Mother did not ask for routine. She asked for reparation, and that required a heart that truly cared. Long before most people gave thought to the hidden dangers within devotional practices, Padre Pio had already sensed something deeply troubling. He bore the wounds of Christ in his flesh, and with them came an extraordinary sensitivity to the unseen world. What others could not feel, he carried in his own body. It was not uncommon for him to suffer intensely on Fridays, especially during Lent. But something strange began to happen around the time of the first Saturdays. The friars who lived with him noticed a pattern. On certain first Saturdays, especially when they coincided with liturgical feasts or major Marian devotions, Padre Pio would become visibly afflicted. His hands would bleed more heavily. His breathing slowed. His movements became more labored, as if an invisible weight pressed down on him. Sometimes he would spend hours in silent agony in front of the tabernacle. No one dared disturb him. It was as if he were reliving something that others could not see. Those closest to him began to ask questions. What was it about these particular Saturdays that stirred such pain? Over time, the answer emerged, not in public homilies, but in private words spoken to spiritual children. Padre Pio revealed that he could feel when devotion was being emptied of love. He could sense when prayers were said out of habit rather than sincerity, and it wounded him, not just because he suffered with Christ, but because he saw how many souls were deceived by a false sense of spiritual security. He spoke of a silent grief in heaven when people fulfilled holy obligations with cold hearts. He felt the sorrow of the Virgin Mary when her children honored her outwardly but ignored her inner call. The first Saturdays, intended as a balm to her suffering heart, often became just another routine for the faithful. Padre Pio saw it clearly. The form was there, but the substance was missing. He said that many fulfilled the practice to obtain promised graces, but not to console the one who suffered for them. On several occasions he was found collapsed in his cell after such days, his face pale, his garments stained with blood. When asked about it, he would give no dramatic explanation, only a quiet statement that many were praying with their lips while their hearts remained far from God. He said this pained Our Lady more than silence. The appearance of devotion without love, he explained, became a veil that blocked grace rather than welcomed it. For Padre Pio, the first Saturdays were not symbolic. They were real spiritual encounters, moments when heaven opened a channel for mercy, and many chose not to receive it. He carried this weight with sorrow and intercession, knowing that behind every mechanical prayer was a soul meant for glory, but drifting toward emptiness. He didn't judge. He simply suffered, and through that suffering he understood. There were three critical errors that both Sister Lucia and Padre Pio warned against. Subtle, often unnoticed mistakes that quietly stripped the first Saturdays of their power. These errors didn't look like rebellion or disobedience. They looked like routine. They looked like devotion done correctly on the outside, but spiritually lifeless on the inside. And yet, these hidden missteps had the power to block the very graces promised through this powerful Marian devotion. The first mistake was confession without true contrition. Many approached the sacrament as part of the checklist, viewing it as a necessary requirement rather than a sacred encounter. They confessed sins out of habit, rushed through the examination of conscience, and lacked the interior sorrow that opens the soul to mercy. Some even used general confessions or surface-level acknowledgments of fault just to complete the condition. But Sister Lucia emphasized that the grace of the first Saturdays depended not on the act alone, but on the disposition of the heart. Without a sincere sorrow for sin and a firm desire for change, the confession became hollow. It did not heal. It only pacified the conscience. The second mistake was praying the rosary mechanically. The requirement to recite 5 decades was clear, but the spirit behind it was often lost. People prayed quickly, distractedly, often while multitasking. The words rolled off their tongues while their minds wandered. They did not pause to reflect on the mysteries or consider the life of Christ through Mary's eyes. Padre Pio once said that a single Hail Mary said with love is worth more than 1,000 without thought. The rosary, when done without contemplation, became a chain of empty sound. It did not ascend like incense. It vanished into the air. The third and most serious mistake was neglecting the true intention of the devotion, to offer reparation and consolation to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. This was not an optional detail, it was the soul of the entire practice. And yet, it was the part most often forgotten. People fulfilled the visible actions but never once offered them as an act of love for Mary's suffering. They didn't meditate on her sorrows, didn't speak to her heart, didn't consciously unite their prayers with a desire to console her. As a result, the entire devotion remained incomplete. It became a ritual without relationship. This third error was the most dangerous because it gave the illusion of success. People walked away believing they had fulfilled heaven's request, never realizing that their offering had not touched the heart it was meant to heal. In the eyes of God, the outer work without inner intention was like a gift given without love. Polite, perhaps, but cold. The first Saturdays were not meant to be a transaction. They were meant to be an encounter. Without the intention of consolation, the soul stood in front of the Immaculate Heart, with hands full of tasks, but empty of tenderness. Together, these 3 errors, confession without sorrow, prayer without attention, and devotion without love, formed a quiet wall. They blocked the flow of grace not because heaven withheld it, but because the soul had unknowingly closed itself off. And so, month after month, faithful Catholics performed the devotion, wondering why nothing changed, why peace never arrived, and why grace seemed to pass them by like a wind that touched others, but never reached their hearts. There came a moment for every soul who practiced the first Saturdays, when the question could no longer be avoided. If the devotion was being done correctly, why did the graces feel so distant? Why did the heart remain heavy, prayer dry, and the promises seemingly out of reach? The answer, as both Sister Lucia and Padre Pio taught, lay not in doing more, but in going deeper. It was not about adding extra prayers or finding new formulas. It was about purification, a cleansing of intention, a recentering of the heart. Padre Pio often said that before one could speak to God, one had to return to silence. It wasn't silence in the room, but silence in the soul, a stripping away of distraction, pride, and self-interest. Without that, inner silence, prayers were noise. So the first step in restoring grace on the first Saturdays was interior stillness. A soul needed to prepare not only the schedule of the day, but the atmosphere of the heart. This meant making space, slowing down, choosing to enter the day not with a checklist, but with reverence. Those who began the devotion with this posture noticed a shift. On the night before the first Saturday, they would set aside time for examination, not just of sin, but of disposition. They would ask themselves honestly, am I coming to this with love or with obligation, with desire or with routine? In the morning, they would offer a silent prayer. Let this day be for her. That simple intention, made with sincerity, changed everything. Confession became more than duty, it became an act of humility. They no longer rushed through the lines, but took time to truly enter into repentance. Even if they had no grave sins, they examined the movements of the heart: pride, selfishness, indifference, coldness in prayer. These hidden wounds, once acknowledged, opened wide the channels of grace. The rosary, once recited quickly or distractedly, was now slowed. Each bead became a step. Each mystery became a meditation. Some would sit in candlelight, imagining the scene of the Annunciation or the agony in the garden, letting Mary guide their thoughts. The rosary was no longer just repeated words. It became a pilgrimage through the life of Christ, made in the company of his mother. Most importantly, they remembered to offer everything for her consolation. Not as a phrase, but as a conscious act. They imagined her heart, pierced, misunderstood, ignored. They placed their prayers like small flowers at her feet. They prayed not only for their needs, but for hers. And in doing so, they began to feel the response, a warmth, a gentleness, a peace that didn't come from emotion, but from a quiet certainty that grace was no longer being blocked. It was being received. Homes that once felt spiritually dry began to shift. Marriages grew softer. Children became more peaceful. Even if trials remained, there was a new strength to face them. The first Saturdays, once routine, became sacred ground. Not because the practices changed, but because the heart had. In this renewal, the promises of Fatima no longer felt like distant possibilities. They became tangible. Mary's presence was felt, and grace, real, transforming, unshakable, returned like water to a thirsty soul. It had not been withheld. It had only been waiting for a heart made clean, a heart that truly loved.